You ready?
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 96. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today we talk about drone survey with Kyle Olson. Let's get to it. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. Paul, how's it going?
Going pretty well today. How you doing? Oh, Happy New Year.
Hey, not too bad. Yeah, Happy New Year to you, too. This is our first recording of the new year. Is it actually our first? Oh, it is our first episode. I looked because our last one went out December 27th. So it's our first episode and our first recording of the new year. And we are cutting it a little close because of lots of time off and things like that. I think we're recording this like 2 days before I release it. I don't like to cut it that close, but, you know, it happens. All right, so in the past, we have discussed drones quite a bit. We have discussed the technology. We've discussed equipment. We've discussed,
the drinking game.
I'm going to bring that up. Absolutely. And we've discussed the FAA Part 107 license, all kinds of stuff. And as Paul mentioned, I think just a couple months ago, we said we should have a drone drinking game. Like every time we say drone, you're drunk now. You take a drink, right? So this podcast is probably going to be heavy in that, unless we go our guest here brings us to the more technical term for drones, because technically they're not called drones anymore. They're called different things. UAS is what we call them in Unmanned Aerial Systems, is what we call them in the Civil Air Patrol and the military. A lot of people call them UAVs, Unmanned Aerial Vehicles, but we have lots of different terms. So without further ado, though, let's bring on our guest. Our guest today is Kyle Olson, and he wrote an article with a co-author, Lynn Rouse, and Kyle can correct my pronunciation of that when he comes on. But the article is A Beginner's Guide to Mesoscale Survey with Quadrotor UAV Systems, and it was published in the Society for American Archaeology's Advances in Archaeological Practice last year, and we will link to that in the show notes, so check it out. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem. And did I pronounce your co-author's last name right?
It's Lenny Rouse, actually. Yeah.
Lenny Rouse. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Gotcha. I pronounced it completely wrong, which is
that's all good. I did too the first time I met her, so don't worry about it.
Nice. All right, so let's get into this article. What caused you to explore drone survey to begin with, without defining mesoscale or anything like that? Why did you go down this route of drone survey? What was your need?
Sure. Well, so we discussed it a little bit in the article, but basically the issue that we came up against was that we're doing a more landscape-focused project in Turkmenistan. There's a main site that's the focus of the grants that Lenny has written, but the research program as a whole is more landscape-focused. And we wanted pretty high-resolution imagery to work with, both for visual illustration purposes, but also for more sort of technical scientific analyses, particularly hydrological mapping, which is something that one of our collaborators is writing his dissertation on. And so basically the satellite imagery that was available was just not good enough. And we figured that the easiest way to get a map of the site and its catchment, for lack of a better term, was to do it ourselves.
Okay. Were there any restrictions to drone flying over there in Turkmenistan, or did you have to get any special permits or anything? I'm always curious about local regulations on that stuff.
Yeah, that I don't know the specifics of, so I don't want to give the wrong answer. Let's just put it this way. From my perspective, it looks pretty unregulated. However, in the data availability statement at the end, if you read that, you'll note that all of the data is restricted by the terms of the research agreement with the Turkmen Ministry of Culture and Heritage. And I think the details of that agreement itself are also restricted. So I couldn't really say one way or the other. However, in practice, the site that we're working at is very remote, and there is almost no infrastructure there at all, except for canals and one electric line. And the electric line is only about 10 meters tall, so it's not really an issue for drones.
Nice. I have heard of people getting harassed at the airport at like customs or something when they try to bring a drone through. Countries.
Well, we definitely have that issue, and the way that we distract them is that technically you're not allowed to bring in more than 2 packs of cigarettes at a time, and I always have a carton at least, and they're much more interested in the cigarettes than they are in the drone.
Nice. You bring them in just so they can get confiscated.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's duty free.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we used to have that trouble with our surveying equipment all the time. It would get confiscated for weeks sometimes when we'd come into Yemen in particular. But yeah, always is an issue, and I think it's probably still an issue in a lot of countries trying to bring high tech, however you want to define it, equipment into a place without necessarily the proper permits, or even with the proper permits. But yeah, cigarettes go a long way still, don't they?
Yeah, well, I'm not giving them the cigarette. Well, I guess yeah. See about that. Maybe not on purpose.
I don't want to get you in trouble here.
No. That's it is what it is. But I will say, we had a field season just recently, actually, in the first 2 weeks of October, and we were not allowed to bring the drone. We didn't even try. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the regulatory situation is shifting under our feet basically constantly. And I think that's pretty typical. I mean, I've talked to people that work in Jordan and elsewhere, for example, and yeah, season to season, you never really know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it might depend on the size of the drone, and we'll get back to that in a second here. So let's go back to the article. We're going to discuss a lot of things that you do talk about in the article, but we're assuming our audience has not read it. We will be linking to it, but not everybody has access to the SAA article. So you mentioned specifically in the article title, mesoscale survey, however you want to pronounce that. And let's talk about that, because first, I'm just going to let the cat out of the bag here. You mean like entire sites and larger areas around sites that are perfect for these type of drone survey. Now, I'm wondering, since you used a drone on this type of survey for this project in Turkmenistan, and you mentioned in the article that it seems inappropriate for smaller scale stuff, like obviously excavation units and really small things, but then even really large aerial surveys as well, not really appropriate for that, most of your drones. What was your basis for saying that? Did you guys do some prior research, or was a literature search that brought that stuff up, or what was your basis for that?
Yeah, so practical experience, definitely. I mean, you can use a drone to map an excavation unit, but if it's like, smaller than 20 by 20 meters, like there's kind of no point. You can do the photogrammetry with a DSLR by hand.
I mentioned it kind of like a Roomba in the future. Like we just have this drone sitting over in the corner, and we all go to break or lunch, and it just goes and like maps out the site for us while we're gone.
Yeah, I mean, you laugh, but it's not that far away. Yeah, and so with respect to the macro scale, that's something that really came out of the literature, and in a kind of back and forth with reviewer two. As the case sometimes is. But actually, there is a pretty good argument to be made that if you're going to do something at the scale of more than 5 kilometers in 5 kilometers square in a single season, you might want to invest in a fixed wing system that can fly at a higher altitude, but has the same quality of sensors. And the major drawback there, of course, is that those are very expensive and are more difficult to operate.
Right. But we're still talking fixed wing drones. We don't necessarily need to go to fixed wing aircraft, piloted aircraft for this type of stuff. You're still referring to drones when you say fixed wing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely more expensive, but you're right. I've noticed the same thing. I've got a DJI Inspire quadcopter, and while it's nice and it does have technically a 2-mile range, you don't have a lot of battery power when it comes to that. Like you're out and back and then swapping the battery out at that kind of range, if you had to do that.
Yeah, and that's exactly why one of the things that we talk about in the article that we kind of developed just sort of on the fly, because we realized we have, it's like the closest site to the place where we live is an hour and a half one way. So, you can't go back and recharge the batteries midday. And basically we had, I think, like 12 batteries with us, maybe more even. And so we would charge them in sequence every night and just be swapping out the batteries constantly, like do a flight, swap a battery, do a flight, swap a battery. And we flew for the entire day, basically, just constantly shifting them out.
Now let's talk about the equipment. So you said, I think it says here you were flying a DJI Mavic Pro.
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
Nice. So for the audience, that's I think the Mavic Pro is quickly becoming, and you can give me your feedback on this, but the Mavic Pro is quickly becoming kind of a go-to for a lot of, I would say, lightweight situations where, you don't need a heavy processing, really high-end camera swap outs and all that stuff. I mean, they have great cameras on them, but you're not going to put extra gear on this, but they fold up and you can practically put it in your pocket, and it's heavy and can withstand the wind. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really, really like the Mavic Pro. I mean, I remember like the first field season that I had in graduate school, somebody had like a Phantom 2 or something, and whoo, man, the trouble they had getting that thing in and out of places and flying it around. It was always crashing and like getting caught and stuff. And, you had to mount your own camera on it. I mean, God bless the guy. He was a, wizard, but he did all the photography with the Phantom 2 with his smartphone, like strapped on with rubber bands and stuff. And it was clever and it worked in a pinch, but the Mavic's camera is just incredible in comparison. And, I learned to use the Mavic Pro. There was a professor here, Peter Cobb, who now has a job in China. He trained me how to use the Mavic Pro. And I mean, I basically learned how to use it in an afternoon, so it's, super user-friendly, super powerful for the price. I mean, when I wrote the article, there's a price quote in there that says $900, but it's quite a bit less than that now, I think.
Right. And if somebody, not to turn into a DJI ad, if somebody wants to see what they look like, you go into any Apple store and they've got one on the shelf usually, and you can pick it up and play with it to get a sense. It's a really sexy piece of equipment.
Yeah, they're pretty great. And I believe within the last few months, they came out with the Mavic Pro 2, which is an upgrade. So you can probably find the Mavic Pro for even less these days as people are transitioning out of them. That is one problem I've noticed with DJI. If you're waiting to pull the trigger on this stuff, DJI will just like every year come out with an upgrade or a very short cycle, let's just say, and they'll come out with an upgrade. And it's usually a pretty decent upgrade. I don't know what they've done to the Mavic Pro 2, but but if you buy a decent enough unit right now, it's probably going to be really good for you for a few years, I would say. Are you guys planning on taking this out on future field sessions, or have you since you wrote the article?
I think we're definitely planning on. So we're going to be talking later in the month about our fieldwork plans for the next couple of years, and in the bigger sense of the project, we really want to extend the mapping program. So I think we'll continue to use it for at least 2 or 3 more seasons, because for the objectives that we have, the equipment, it does exactly what we need. So basically in the pilot season, we really just wanted to like figure out how it worked and to try to see if we couldn't actually start to map the landscape. And I would say we were moderately successful in that. Some of the stuff came out to the results were good enough for our purposes, but I would be ashamed to publish them.
Right.
But in any case, we basically, it was a sort of proof of concept kind of thing. And so I think we're shooting to cover basically what would be the entirety of this sort of site and its immediate environs. There's outlying settlements. There's, I don't know how much you guys know about the Central Asian Bronze Age civilization, but it's kind of a situation like the Hohokam in I guess New Mexico, Arizona, where it's sort of this like interior drainage basin with all of these irrigation systems. And in the Central Asian Bronze Age context, the Russian was coming out there a little bit. You have these sort of, I don't really know how you would describe it, but large, the Russian scholars call them urban. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but let's just put it this way. They're large, they're complex, there are settlement mounds, there are fortifications, there are outlying production facilities. There's, if I said canals already, I'll say it again. There's so much stuff going on, these like sort of site complexes. And we would really like to map the entire thing at a really high resolution. So
how big is this, is the main site here?
The main site here is, I would say maybe like, probably 800 meters by 500 meters. And it's, I think like 4 or 5 meters tall, maybe. It's a typical tell. It doesn't look like much. But when you get on it, it's a carpet of sherds and slag and bits of bronze and this, that, and the other thing. So
40 hectares is a pretty big site.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
And
it's not even
sites in the surrounding area. What kind of area are you looking at? What kind of site size and distribution are you talking about?
Yeah, so in the immediate environs of the site in particular, I think it's probably like several hundred hectares. I mean, it becomes a boundary issue, right? Because it sort of bleeds into other settlement groups and site complexes. We could really, so the way that the Soviet scholars who originally surveyed this landscape, they conceived of it as a mosaic of oases. And so all of these like site clusters are named after the wells that the oases, bore that name in the 1950s or whatever. So you have this group is called Togolok, and there's like 28 or 29, maybe more sites, these sort of like tells or fortifications within the Togolok group. And so presumably, we could, in theory, map the entire thing. And that would be really interesting because that hasn't even been done like the old school way, at least to the best of my knowledge. I mean, there is survey data, but in terms of like a really detailed architectural map of an entire site complex, that would really be a major step forward.
That's great.
Yeah, we've talked about how much we all seem to like the Mavic Pro. What were some of the limitations you saw with using that device while you were out there?
Yeah, so two things. One is the battery life, which is pretty short. But I mean, it's good enough. You fly, we have a table in the article that sort of shows what you really can expect to get out of it. But the upper limit of what I would be comfortable flying on a single battery is like 18 minutes. Mm-hmm. But in 18 minutes, depending on what altitude and settings you fly at, you can cover a ground area of between 2 to 16 hectares, that's pretty substantial. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that I really like. One of the other drawbacks is that if you have an issue with the firmware, whether with the remote controller, with the app, or with the drone itself, then you're going to run into the issue of you really need the internet. And if you don't have access to the internet, you are up at creek.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That was a fun adventure that I had, trying to find literally the only place in the entire province that had Wi-Fi, which turned out to be a sanitarium, which was a real fun adventure.
And I've noticed DJI products only need a firmware update like when you get into the field. That seems to be pretty consistent. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. But other than that, I would say, I mean, maybe now I'm trying to think. There were a couple of cases where the drone lost connection with the piloting app that we were using, and I still haven't really figured out what was going on there. That might not be a specific issue to the Mavic Pro, but that's definitely. And we put a sort of pop out table in the article discussing some of the technical issues that we came across. Most of them have to do with the communication between the different components of the system, but otherwise, it works like a charm.
Okay.
So you went out with extra batteries so you could swap out batteries when you had to. Did you have any other extra parts? I mean, propellers presumably, but you only went with one drone, or did you go with multiples?
Yeah, we only went with one drone, and that's maybe something that we wouldn't do again in the future necessarily. Let's see. Yeah, we had extra propellers. We had the landing pad, so just like a little piece of nylon that folds up like one of those photo reflectors, Mm-hmm. And then we also had.
You had a portable power bank, I see here.
Portable power bank. Yeah, that's super crucial. You got to recharge the RC and the phone. So if you can get one that like has multiple ports on it as well, that's really ideal.
The backpack, a special backpack to carry it all in?
Yeah, so we bought basically just like or Lenny bought rather just a photographer's backpack. That was super useful.
Mm-hmm. Leg extensions are cool because I didn't know the Mavic Pro had leg extensions. That's pretty neat in certain areas. Yeah, and especially if you're flying in a location which has like sort of uneven terrain, that could be super useful. In our case, it's just sand and clay, and as long as you don't land on a bush, you're good. Nice. All right, well, we are going to take our first break and come back. I want to talk more about the piloting software you used and some other challenges and benefits to doing all this. So we'll be back in just a second.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the "did we just hit a million orders" stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Hi, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 96. We're discussing quad rotor UAV survey with Kyle Olson, based off of an article in SAA Advances. Kyle, I really like the way that you were describing the system that you guys were using, kind of to jumpstart other archaeologists that are interested, drone curious, I guess. And I like that you had charts in there. You'd mentioned before you had a chart of altitudes and overlaps and battery life, which is some really useful, sure, 3, 4, or 5 years from now, it might be out of date for whatever equipment is available then. But right now, it's a really useful kind of metric for somebody who wanted to go out in the field for themselves and to start being able to experiment, because you've done a little bit of that and have published it for us. So I did also like that you were talking about a lot of off-the-shelf. You were talking about the Mavic drone being an off-the-shelf piece of hardware. You didn't modify it in any specific way, at least not that you mentioned in the article. And you also talk about software. And as far as I could tell, it was all off-the-shelf stuff. So I think that Chris had some questions specific to the software that you were using.
Yeah, I noticed that I believe you said in the article you used Map Pilot from Drones Made Easy for Mission Planning. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Did you try anything else out, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we tried, oh goodness, there was another one that we tried. I think it was Drone Deploy, maybe. Yeah, because that was a free option. And if I remember correctly, Drone Deploy worked pretty well, but there was some issue with it that, basically, it was a situation where we had a limited amount of time in the field, and we were just like, you know what, we know this other one works, so we're going to go with it.
Okay.
But yeah, basically the important thing with the planning app. So again, thinking back to this kind of issue of it was our sort of pilot study, no pun intended. Was that, we tried a couple of different ways of flying the drone using the DJI Go app to do the waypoints as a way of doing the paths. But actually, you have to fly the path first and drop the waypoints and then set it to do it automatically. So there's no point if you're doing it twice. And then piloting it manually works okay, but it's really, really exhausting mentally and physically to sit there and, move the drone forward with one of the joysticks and make sure that it stays on a straight transect and then turn it at the right time. Flying a drone with the joystick is a lot of fun, but, if you're going to be doing this all day in the hot sun, you want to automate it. And really, that's to circle back around to the direct answer, is that really all you need from one of these apps is the ability to draw a survey polygon and it'll be on some kind of base imagery, and then to basically set the flight parameters to tell it how close together to fly the transects, what altitude to fly at, what overlap you want. As long as the app will do basically those 4 things, then you're pretty much good to go. There's some of the other ones have fancy features and things like this. But really, that's the basics of what you need.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, too. I've used Autopilot before, too. I noticed this in your list of applications you guys may have checked out. Autopilot, as you list here, though, is a $30 application. But luckily, these aren't subscription. It's like a one-time purchase. So that's handy.
Yeah.
The thing I liked about Autopilot, and I think Drone Deploy does this as well, if I'm not mistaken. I've only tested Drone Deploy out. But I think I'm all about efficiency and workflows. And the less you can do in the field that's really kind of intensive and stuff that you don't need to be doing in the field, the better, right? Like you should be maximizing your time in Turkmenistan and not bothering with software. So the thing I like about these, and tell me if Map Pilot can do this, is you can, if you have overlay maps of your area and you basically know what you're going to do, you can essentially do your flight planning from the States, from your office, and then just upload those KMLs or whatever type of file it's going to take to your software. And then basically go out there. You might have to fine tune some adjustments based on what you've done and battery life and stuff like that. Like, what did I finish here? Things like that. But you're not doing all of the flight planning while you're standing there in the field, with people saying, okay, let's get this thing going. Were you guys able to do some of that pre-planning, or did you do most of your planning out there in the field, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so you're definitely able to do that. One of the things I really like about Map Pilot is that the amount of metadata that's involved is really robust. It saves lots of different files that you can use to sort of retrace your steps after the fact. But that also it's very nimble and able to accommodate you planning your survey transects ahead of time. Which I think, because basically the approach that we're advocating is that you would, define a sort of bounding box of your largest survey, catchment that you want to cover, and then divide that up into smaller chunks. And you can do that, and it will actually show on the overlay where all of your other missions are. So you can, neatly stack them next to each other and just kind of cover the whole thing like a lawnmower.
Nice. Yeah, the other thing is, like you said, being able to snap the pictures properly. When I first got the Inspire, that's when I ended up landing on autopilot, because it needed to be able to take the pictures at an interval, and then it was a little bit brute force when I first started using it too. There's a little more automation for photogrammetry these days, but I had to figure out, like, okay, what's the best altitude and speed? How fast can this thing actually take pictures? And one thing, I don't know if you guys noticed this or not, because maybe all the cards are like this now, but I ended up having a problem with it taking pictures fast enough because, and I didn't realize this, but the SD card, the micro SD card that was in that camera actually wasn't fast enough in its processing speed to be able to handle the pictures. So I set the pictures at a certain rate that the drone could actually take pictures at, but it was trying to write to the card, and it wasn't writing fast enough. And then I put a ultra high speed micro SD card in there, and it was like bam, bam, bam with the JPEGs and I could fly at a higher rate of speed using essentially less battery, because I'm covering more ground with the same amount of battery, and take more pictures. Did you guys experience any of that with your SD cards?
Yeah, so we experienced a number of different sort of photo malfunctions, which are shown in Figure 3 of the in the article. But basically, so the Map Pilot drops a little dot every time it takes a picture, and so you can actually kind of monitor how smoothly it's going. And the sort of right half of our flight plan is very smooth, looks like a go board, and the left half is all manners of wonky. And so basically what was happening there was the wind speed was changing, and so the drone was changing the speed at which it was flying, and that was causing an issue with the exact problem that you brought up with the SD card capture, because the drone was timed to take a photo every interval or whatever. And it, if it was moving too fast, then it, because it had like a tailwind or whatever, there would be sort of a gap between the image capture. And that ended up messing up some of our photogrammetry, actually. So if we had a longer field season, we probably would have redone those areas.
Nice. Would you guys go back? Do you have, you're going to talk about your future surveys out there, but since this was a pilot study, do you plan to go back and redo all this stuff, or is there usable data that you're going to have, or you're just going to start clean?
I think for the main site itself, like the main tepe, we'll probably just leave that model as is. It's really a high quality model, and everything worked the way that it was supposed to with that one. So I think it's going to be mostly the catchment that we redo. We have a couple of paleo channels that we surveyed with the drone that I think also the pilot data is probably good enough. But in terms of filling in the entire area, yeah, we're definitely going to want to redo it. Mm-hmm. And I think also, like, a sort of broader point too is that I think even though, so like we were absolute beginners when we started on this process. And one of the things that I'd really like to emphasize, and I kind of wish that I had managed to stick it in the article too, is that the expectation should be that if you're going to have a kind of ambitious mapping program, that it's going to take more than one field season to work out all the kinks and get it actually going. It
really takes them just sitting down with these things to really figure them out. I know that autopilot software, it can be incredibly complicated, but because of that, it's incredibly robust in what you can do with your flight paths and different things. But man, you can't just jump into that stuff, can you?
Yeah, I mean, there is some language in the article about, you should practice before you go to the field and all of this. But, you run into the issue of to fly in the US, you need the FAA license. So, yeah.
Yeah. What was your experience with drones prior to doing this? Well, first off, were you the pilot? Were you the drone pilot, or did you have somebody else?
Yeah, so Lainey and I switched off, but I was sort of the drone survey was kind of made my domain when we were sort of dividing up the different responsibilities on the project. It was just sort of something that happened like in the months leading up to us leaving to the field. It was like, we had a ceramicist, we had a geomorphologist. We knew that I was coming, but it wasn't entirely clear what my role was going to be. And then when I was talking with Linny about it, she was like, "Oh, you're taking this course, and part of the course is learning how to fly the drone. Do you want to fly the drone?" And I said, "All right, sure. I'll learn about the drones."
Yeah, twist my arm.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like drone pilot and like the drone guy or drone person is going to be like the total station person. Oh, who knows how to run the total station? Great, you're doing it for the rest of the project.
Yeah, I think right now those are the same person on a lot of projects.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
As somebody who went to the field a lot back in the day as the total station guy, run with it as long as you can. If you really like the field work, it's a good way to get in. Having one particular set of skills that's techie that other people may be a little leery of doing.
I know. Hey, in CRM, they got me a couple back-to-back jobs because I hadn't run a total station before, and I learned on one project, and I ended up spending like 3 months on that one project just running the total station the whole time because I got onto the project that had already been running for like a month, so they were way behind on the data they were supposed to be collecting because nobody had been doing it because nobody figured it out, and so I did it, and then it took me that whole 3 months to kind of catch up, and then I had all that knowledge, and it got me like my next 2 jobs back to back. But I was a total station guy on those next 2 jobs, so I don't know.
I'd like to combine the two because when I look at the drone work here, the DEM that you made, I'd spend weeks making topo maps with the total station at the start of a project, and it would be nice to be able to just cut a big chunk of that out right at the get-go, and then use the total station for planning and for finer grained stuff.
Yeah. So the figure 5 in the article, that's the entirety of the main mound. And that was one flight and the processing time, post-processing a couple of hours.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah. And
that's much better than a couple of weeks.
Yeah. It has a ground resolution of like 1.3 centimeters. So we're pretty happy with it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Nice. I noticed your flight altitude on at least the handwritten backup notes here, the paper backup notes that you had says 30 meters. Was that the consistent altitude you were flying at? And did you try other altitudes to kind of nail something down?
Yeah, so we in table 6, it's just sort of like a record of all the flights that we did that actually the full workflow was successful. And for those, we did a majority at 40 meters, but there's also a decent amount at 60 meters and one flight that was at 30 as well. I think 20 would really just be too inefficient in terms of the amount of ground that you would cover. And especially considering that you only get, like 0.3 centimeters of improvement in the ground resolution from 20 to 30 meters. Like, I mean, maybe you need that 0.3, but maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah. This I think is the most useful chart for me, looking at table 6, because you can see how changes in altitude and some other metrics here really don't have a massive impact on your ultimate output resolution, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, so that was that and some other things when we were writing the article. Like some of the things that kind of inspired us to write this article actually was that as we were trying to figure this stuff out for ourselves, like there wasn't really a whole lot of practical advice in the literature. And I'm not saying that to say that the literature is bad, but it's just that a lot of the literature kind of black boxes the whole process of doing this. And I mean, that's kind of to be expected in some respect, because until maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, like if you flew a drone in the field, like it was a pretty DIY kind of thing. You had to like all these people, like from basically like there's 2 groups of citations in the article. One is pre 2012 and the other post 2012, and everything pre 2012, man, those guys, like that's their whole academic project is to just figure out how drones are supposed to work, you know, and that literature is very, very different from everything that's come after it. Super interesting, but you know, you're not going to see a table like that in a lot of these publications.
Yeah.
I
feel like the big shift probably happened when DJI just became super affordable and crazy useful. You know, after they kind of figured their stuff out, object avoidance on almost everything they have, and now the Mavic Pro, it's just lowering the barrier to entry to not only learning how to fly, because these things practically fly themselves, but just also the affordability of it and the durability. You know, I mean, they're becoming way better. So you go from practical stuff like here's how we did it to here's what we did. But I appreciate stuff like this because you're right, there is no information about this. And it's like the last people that we interviewed, Paul, with the ceramics, using a tablet-based system to record ceramics. Sure, they were talking about what they did in their analysis, but they were really talking about the nuts and bolts of how they did it. And there's not enough articles about that. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this, Kyle.
No, I really like that in this article, and those charts again are fantastic. I've got a quick little question for Kyle, and unfortunately it doesn't lend itself great for a podcast, but if somebody gets their hands on the article, and we'll put that in the show notes. A quick question here is, if we look at figure 6, 6A shows an old excavation unit in an aerial shot. Is that the same thing that is in figure 5C, right in the center on the edge where the mound goes between kind of pinkish and purplish?
Yeah, so Eagle Eye Paul, that is the one correction that we have submitted so far, which is going to come out soon. The scale on that is incorrect. So the 6A should be 10 meters rather than 1 meter. I'm not really sure how that happened somewhere in the workflow in ArcGIS when I was making the figure, but yeah, so that's an old excavation unit by Victor Sarianidi, I think, maybe not. Anyway, previous excavation that's 10 meters square. Yeah.
No, it's just, I picked up on that just because I was trying to key into some features to see between the different imagery that you provide in the article, what matches up to what. And that was the one thing that I could zone in on. Again, not the best content for a podcast, but thank you for
No, it's okay. Actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because this was one of the things that in the most recent field season, we did actually get a lot of use out of this model, because we were looking for different areas to open new excavations. And it was very interesting to look that there are several other excavation units actually that are shallower or smaller than this one that you can see in the model. It's not as clear at this sort of like zoomed out scale. Mm-hmm. That one really stands out because it's 10 by 10, and they didn't backfill it, which you can see that as well. Yep. But in any case, some of these smaller excavation units, it's very clear from the model that even though they didn't really dig very deep and they kind of just picked the spots at random, as far as we can tell, they sit on top of pretty substantial architecture that's not necessarily so visible on the surface. So that actually turned out to be something really useful for us to look at in this most recent field season.
In the last few minutes here, Kyle, I'm wondering, as we said before, you might be, you and your partner there might be becoming known as the drone people now that you publish this article. So you're the published experts now on how to do this, right? For 2019 or 2018.
Well, until the next person comes out with their article.
Well, that's what I'm saying though. Have you had any feedback from this with people not just talking about the article, but saying, hey, can you come out and shoot this on my project, or can you show me how?
Actually, no. I think, the article came out sort of, it was published online in August, and then it's like in the official, issue 6, volume 6, issue 2, which came out in, I think, late November or so. So yeah, people haven't really reached out too much yet.
Kind of end of field season.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also, there's a lot of the people who are cited in the article probably wouldn't find the article very useful. So they already know what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah. So,
well, hopefully you've inspired some people to do some of this work and to at least look into it, because, as you probably found, the DJI Mavic Pro is, relative to other things, it's a pretty easy drone to fly. I mean, the DJI does a really good job with stabilization and everything else. And it's just, once you learn the basics, you can actually do quite a bit with it, and then learn that software and just hit the ground running.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the drone that the toy drone that I learned how to fly on first, it had such bad vertical control that eventually the teacher who was teaching had to have students have it on a leash.
Yeah.
Like the drone had a leash, and so you could fly it left and right, but not have it shoot like 100 meters in the air in the blink of an eye. And then you go from flying that to flying the Mavic, and it's just like,
oh yeah,
the gyroscope, it just hovers, and also the other, just real quick, because I know we're kind of running out of time, but one of the really cool things that the Mavic does, in addition to using these peripheral sort of apps to do the automated flights, is that there are actually a number of very interesting flight modes within the DJI Go app itself as well. One of which is really, really cool is the rotate. So you can basically set like a fixed point and tell it how far out you want it to rotate, and you can take a video circling, like a cinematic shot. If you have a really cool site or something, you can get these beautiful videos. And also for photogrammetric purposes as well, if you want to do a really high resolution model of some kind of landscape feature or something, that's a really effective way to do that if you need to get multiple angles and whatnot. So
nice. Were you guys able to play with some of those more non-academic flight modes and photos while you were out there?
Yeah, absolutely. The place where we live is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Medieval Merv, and there are all these different monuments just everywhere, all over the place. And so we would there was one that's like right behind the dig house, basically, that we would just fly over and over and over again, just to try different stuff out.
That's awesome.
So it takes up its own hard drive, all those, that sandboxing.
That's right. Sure does. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Kyle. I really appreciate this. As I said, I appreciate the article, and just printing out writing a nuts and bolts kind of article like this to help people get down that path. Paul, do you got any final questions for Kyle?
No final questions, but you're absolutely right. Seeing the nuts and bolts kind of article like this, I've been searching Craigslist for the last couple of days, just looking for somebody offloading their DJI Phantom 3s mostly. But it's interesting. I mean, it's great. You really gave some useful information for how to start with these, and showing your results is fantastic.
Cool. Thanks for having me, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed having you. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. And as I said at the top of the show, check out the show notes for we'll have the DOI link to the article in here. I don't want to just put the PDF of the article in because it is behind a paywall. So if you have an SAA account, you can go and check that out, and possibly maybe Kyle will give you a copy. I'm not sure, but I can't do that. But check out that link, and we'll have some other links in there related to the show. All right. We'll be back in a second for our app of the day segment. This network is listener supported. We're trying to move away from paid advertising while also creating new shows and supporting the ones we have. The APN has never and will never make a serious profit on our podcast. Every little dime we make goes back into the network and improving show quality. So become a member today at www.arcpodnet.com/members to show your support, get some extras, and be a benefactor for archaeological education. Members get stickers, a coffee mug, a t-shirt, bonus content, early access to episodes, a private Slack team to talk to other members and the hosts, and full access to training on Team Black over at arccert.black. So check out our memberships at www.arcpodnet.com/members today and support archaeological education. That's www.arcpodnet.com/members. Now back to the show. All right, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 96, and this is the App of the Day segment. But first, Paul, I don't know if anybody's actually listening to this segment, because if you're playing the drone drinking game, then you're completely hammered off your ass right now.
Yeah, you're probably on the way to the hospital, I think.
Right? I know. So, I mean, I wanted to also, as far for the App of the Day segment, I wanted to review some kind of, drone related app or something like that. But I've already reviewed Autopilot before on this show, and I think Drone Deploy as well. And honestly, if you search the app stores for drone apps, you're going to find dozens of them out there. And I would say, if you are, my only comment on drone piloting apps and flight planning software is, if you are interested in that, definitely start with some free ones. Don't spend any money right off the bat. Start with some free ones. Try a handful of them, like it sounds like Kyle did, so they did the right thing there. Try a handful of them just so you can get the feel for how they work, and from a free standpoint. And then if you think you need more functionality, look at the paid ones. But I find that in archaeology, like a lot of things, like we use Trimbles, we use total stations, we use these really advanced equipment, but quite frankly, in archaeology, we use like 5% of what they're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And that's often the case, like with these more expensive applications. Like, do you really need a $40, $50, $60 application when you're doing a $5 job most of the time? I mean, if it has to do the one thing you need it to do and you have to pay for that to happen, then I guess it is what it is. But I would suggest definitely trying the free ones first, because more than likely they're going to be able to do what you need them to do and get it done efficiently. So the biggest thing is you want the app to not crash. Because depending on what the crash, I should say, how do you call that? The crash status is, or guess, or what the crash scenario is. Like when the app crashes, what does the drone do? And that depends on which one you're using. DJI drones, when they stop receiving some sort of signal or command, they just hover. They just stop and hover. But some other ones might do a return to home point, or they might try to land or something like that. Maybe you're over water. I don't know. So you got to play with that and intentionally crash your app too. Like while you're flying a flight path, just hit the home button and crash your app and see what happens. But do this in like a soccer field somewhere out in the open. But definitely do those things. Don't do them like Kyle said, they did some testing. Don't do it in Turkmenistan with no internet and no backup drone, right? Do it in the comfort of your own city, where you're at, and try to go through all these scenarios. That's one big thing I can say too, when I was learning how to fly. And still now, anytime you go flying, you're not necessarily like practicing straight and level flight. That's stupid, boring, and easy, right? Like a child could do that. But what you practice for is the failures. You practice the emergencies, and not enough people do that with drone flying. They just practice in these nice, safe environments, and they practice, okay, so I can fly straight. I can do this. I can add this flight path. Yeah, but what happens when your radio fails? What happens when your smartphone dies while you're flying? What is your drone going to do? And if you don't know that, you're going to lose a very expensive piece of equipment. So,
yeah, you're talking like a pilot.
I know, right?
Right. How much of getting your private pilot's license is spent, trying to figure out what happens in all these strange conditions.
Exactly. I mean, the whole time. I can remember when I got my when I did my final check ride for my private pilot's license. It was I actually failed it. I did like 97% right, but you had to get everything right to pass the check ride. And the one thing that I didn't do was, and this is why you practice, is we were practicing an emergency descent, which is basically almost like your engine fails or something like that. So the instructor basically just reached over, pulled my throttle back to idle, and said, set up for emergency descent. And so I had to lose as much altitude as possible. And you put your flaps down, you pull your airspeed back. The airspeed's already coming back with the throttle down, but you kind of nose up until it starts to go down again. And then when you're on your trajectory down, the final thing that you do is you use your trim wheel to trim out your yoke, so you're not pushing really hard on it, right? And I didn't do that, and because I didn't do that, and there was so much force on the yoke as I was trying to push down, it eased back just a little bit. And when it eased back a little bit, I was shooting for a target airspeed, and that airspeed came down as my nose came up just a hair. It was almost imperceptible, but he saw it, and I came out of this 5-knot window you had on the airspeed just barely, and I brought it back in, and he didn't even tell me until I landed, until we got out of the plane. And he's like, so you did this? And I was like, son of a bitch. So the next day we went out and did one flight where I did this emergency descent, and I'll be damned if I didn't trim that airplane out first thing. And every time since then. So practice the failures.
Yeah. Same can go for scuba diving, right?
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
It's learn how to. Anyhow, this is really off topic now. Maybe we ought to buy me a drone, and then you and I can split up that list that he's got of different drone software and do a comparison show.
So head over to arcpodnet.com/ads, where you'll find a sponsor link, and you can sponsor us for any amount of money, and we can buy Paul a drone. So let's make that happen. We'll start a GoFundMe account.
$1,500 for a new Mavic Pro 2 would be just fine with me.
I know that's not that big a deal. Yeah, in the spirit of science and testing. Yeah. All right. So today, Paul and I have 2 apps that have nothing to do with archaeology technology, but they're kind of fun, I think. So I bought a house basically over Christmas, and we're moving in at the end of this month. But since I've been renting for quite some time, I've never really had the ability to make my house a real smart home, right? I mean, you can get like connected plugs and different things like that. I've got a Nest thermostat, different things, but you don't really have the ability when you're renting to just tear some stuff apart and put in new hardware. And so I've been doing a lot of research now that I do have that ability. And the one thing I've stayed away from is the Philips system. The Philips Hue light bulbs were the first things they came out with. They've got a lot of stuff now, but I generally stayed away from those only because they required the Philips Smart Hub to work. And it's this little device that you had to buy at some point during the process for all the other stuff to work. But the research I did basically ended up telling me that the reason they have this smart hub is because it makes everything so much more stable. You've now got one device that's trying to talk to the internet, and generally it's talking to it not through Wi-Fi. You plug it in through your Ethernet, through your router. So this one device is plugged into the internet through your router, and that's a solid connection. That's only going to die if your router dies or your internet dies from the wall. So that one device hooks to your internet and then talks to the rest of the devices in your house, and it's always on, always talking to those devices. When you have various other devices that connect either via Bluetooth or they just connect onto your Wi-Fi or something like that, connections drop all the time. Like my August smart lock drops off the Wi-Fi constantly. It's usually when the batteries start to get a little like below 30-40%, it starts dropping off the Wi-Fi randomly, and it has to connect via Bluetooth and all these other things. So I ended up purchasing, I found a good deal on Amazon right after Christmas. That was like, I think it was like $60 or $70 for two of the million color Philips Hue smart bulbs. So they're dimmable and they'll do any color, and the smart hub. So it kind of gets you into the system. And I'll tell you what, they're fantastic. I mean, they're the best. They're the most dynamic bulbs I've ever seen. They have all these different color ranges. They're incredibly responsive. It hooks up to HomeKit on my device. And the app that I want to talk about is not the Philips Hue app, which you need to connect all this stuff. You need that to kind of start the system off. But I downloaded an app called iConnect Hue, and it's just lowercase I Connect Hue, and it's a third-party application for really doing some amazing, robust things with your lights and some of the other stuff in your Hue system. And one of the cool things they have is animations, and that's an in-app purchase. So I think this app was like $5.99, and then I paid another, I think, $2 for an in-app purchase for these animations. And you can create your own, but they've got a bunch of them. Like here's sunset, sunrise, but basically it's got a cycle, and like the sunrise one is 30 minutes. So to start your lights at like a low, deep reddish orange color, and then over the course of 30 minutes, raise them up into full like orange sun kind of bright. And it's just, you can say underwater is one of the animations, and over the course of 15 minutes, it basically moves your lights, and it doesn't matter how many lights you have on there. You can have 1 or 20, but it will randomly move them all through a palette of colors. And I know this all sounds really stupid, first world problems, but I'll tell you what, it's really neat. It's really cool. And I can't recommend it more. So if you have the Philips Hue system, or you're considering smart lights or anything else, definitely check out the iConnect Hue app, and a lot of their stuff works without the in-app purchases, but they do have a number of things you can do in here that, if you want to get really crazy with it, require another in-app purchase. But for under $10, you can be totally set up with everything you want to do. So anyway, check that out. Not archaeology related, but we got to be fun every once in a while. And that's it for me.
All right. Well, Chris, also mine is, my app of the day is not archaeological. Mine is called WWF Free Rivers. And so the last few app of the day apps that I've mentioned are things that have been out for a few years. Sometimes things that have been out for 10 years I didn't even know existed. This one has been out for less than a year. It's not useful in any particular way to get anything specially done. It's a teaching app. I think it's worth, anybody taking a look at downloading, not for its own content, which isn't bad, but to try to get a sense of what one can do. It's a little kind of a game built in Unity. It's an AR app, and you start out, you point it at a tabletop, and it draws a landscape for you. It's got mountains on one side. It's got a couple rivers that converge into a bigger river, and flow down past past fields and and then down to the sea. And it's teaching. It's a teaching tool, probably for, let's say, I would guess like middle school age children. talking about the water cycle and about water use, and in particular, it pays a lot of attention to dams and hydroelectric power and the effects of and how one can do better or worse things with it. It's a free app. It runs on iOS and Android. I've downloaded it to my phone, and I'll say that it works just fine on the phone, but it probably would be much better on a tablet, just because of the detail is sometimes a little hard to see on the phone. It's a very cute teaching tool. And I guess if you were a science teacher, for example, that was teaching about the water cycle, this would be something that could be particularly useful, for part of this class, while, to capture kids' imaginations and to capture their attention for a bit. Not a whole lot I have to say about it. Again, it's not something that you're going to use to get anything in particular done, but it is something to entertain yourself with for a little bit. And if you're somebody who is involved in education in any way, it's a good example of a well done single trick application to use AR to augment, no pun intended, but maybe slight pun intended, to augment one's teaching.
Yeah, I've just downloaded this. It's pretty cool. I think it could probably be used because archaeologists need to know about site formation processes and things like that. And I'll tell you what, one of the best classes I took in my grad school program, and I don't know what turned me onto this class because it wasn't a requirement, but it was a fluvial geomorphology class.
Mm-hmm.
And learning about how, rivers move around in different sorts of soil environments and things like that, and how to read that on the landscape, and looking at the paleo traces of where rivers were and how oxbow lakes and stuff like that are created. I mean, all that is just fascinating. It's amazing stuff. And if this might not be able to help with that right away, but it is a very new application, and they might be coming out with some stuff like that. I'd like to be able to, say, change the vegetation along the course of a river, or change the type of soil and see how that affects it, and run through time, say, advance this 400 years and show me, what this could look like based on what it's doing. That'd be pretty neat.
Yeah, that's where I would see something like this potentially be useful. Again, mostly as a teaching tool, maybe as a modeling tool, but to do exactly what you're saying, change the vegetation, the soil type, the amount of rain, any of these kind of parameters that we wonder about, to try to get a sense as a scientist, as somebody who's learning about these particular, especially geological processes. Though I suppose it would also, if we think a little more outside of the box, it would probably also work with site formation and taphonomic processes. If you wanted to see how a mud brick building decomposes and what happens to it, you could modify the same sort or adopt the same sort of an interface. And the AR doesn't teach you anything that you wouldn't learn by having a video or reading something straight, but it makes it a little engaging. And so again, I have a lot of these, I don't know really what I would do with it, kind of questions and apps when I talk about things, but this one is very visually appealing and is slick and well done. And I think that if you had the wherewithal and you had a specific thing that you wanted to teach, it'd be a really good model for how one could do that.
Nice. No, well, I love apps like this, especially free.
You can't
go
beat
wrong,
the price.
Yeah. And like I said, even if it's limited, I mean, you're right. We do have video. You can go to YouTube and stuff like that, but this is just a new medium and a way to experience things. And it's the same reason I do different things with the podcast. It's like you're reaching a different audience in a different way that engages their brain cells and not something else. So, I'm all for it. Good app. I like it. All right. Well, we'll have links to those. And I've got a bunch of other stuff that we talked about in the conversation with Kyle related to drones and some of the mapping software. And the article, the link to the article itself, at least the DOI link to the article itself. And if you're doing anything with drones out there, or have an app you want us to talk about or that you're excited about, just let us know. You can find our contact information on the website, arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. And for this particular episode, another / and then 96. So archaeotech/96. But our contact information is on all the episodes, so check that out. All right. Well, that's all I've got. Paul, good to go?
Good to go. Want to go out and find myself a drone and try some of these programs that Kyle talked about because, geez, that was a lot of fun.
That's right. If you happen to have a DJI Phantom 3 or really any drone lying around, please send it to Paul. He's in desperate need of a drone. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Paul, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Chris. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off-Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.